Hi, I'm Tim Shatney, and in this video we would create a sequencer as Max4Live device. This video course is a part of LearnSD project, which is an interactive web platform for learning sound design. You can do things like that there, or like this. You can also follow our Max4Live course on LearnSD website and get even more information about every lesson. The whole project is just starting, so it is really interesting to hear your opinion. You can write it in the comments to this video. In my Ableton session I prepared the sound, which would trigger with help of this sequencer. So let's go and create it. We open this menu, Max MIDI effect, double click on this template and go to edit mode. And so in comparison to what we did earlier, this time we won't get any raw MIDI data from Ableton. We would generate it by ourselves. And to do it, I create a metro object which generates bangs at regular intervals. And this interval we could specify in its first argument. In this case, we would get every 500 milliseconds a bang from its outlet. We still don't get it because we need to activate a metro object with value 1. And 0 deactivates it. We could do the same thing with the toggle object. I just pressed T on the keyboard to create this object, and it does this switch between 0 and 1. And so now these bangs, which we get here, we could use for counting. I use a counter object to count from 1 to 8. I connect this bang here, and I get values from its first outlet. From 1 to 8. We could even set count maximum dynamically, like that, and count, for example, from 1 to 10, or from 1 to 7, whatever you want. And it's a very good start for creating a sequencer. Now it's time to introduce an object which you would probably love and use in many situations in Max programming, which is called multi-slider. When you just create it, you have just one slider here, but you can easily change it. You just go to this menu again, go to attributes and pick the size attribute. You can make, for example, size of 8, and now you have 8 individual sliders in one object. We could actually modify now it, make a little bit more beautiful the GUI. I want to make the ghost bar and slider spacing. And now we have really very clearly this representation of 8 sliders. And from its first outlet we get the list of all slider values, which are now in between -1 and 1. Let's change this range of values to the MIDI range from 0 to 127, like that. And the only problem which you still have here is that those values are updated on the output when we release the mouse. So you can see I change values and then I release mouse and those values now updated here. We can make it better. We can make continuous data output. Just tick this box here. And then these values are updated in real time. But what we really want now is actually to get individual values of these sliders. We can do it with a fetch message and add replaceable argument here. And like that, we could get a value of each individual slider from this right outlet of multi-slider object. This is now the value for the first slider, for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. And now instead of doing this with our hands, we could use this value from counter to just have automatically these values, which makes it already pretty good sequencer. If you imagine that this output value here is actually a MIDI node, we could also use the same thing. We could copy it and use for the same this multi-slider same fetch message, and for example use the second multi-slider for velocity values. And so for example, you have here a MIDI note and here a velocity for this MIDI note. And now we could just take all these things together and generate a MIDI message to trigger the sound in Ableton. To do this, I create a make node object which generates node on and node off events. And then I just write default velocity, which we could change later, of course, and then the duration of our node on event. So now after 500 milliseconds, we would get a node off event. And we connect this value to pitch, this value to velocity, and then pack its output into one message, which would contain two integer values. The first one for MIDI node, the second one for velocity value. And if we now want to see what happens in console, what this pack object outputs, we could just open this console and start our prototype for sequencer. And we see that we get these pairs. So the first list is node on event with our MIDI node and velocity. And then the second list is node off event, which just says that for this MIDI node, we need to turn it off so we send the velocity of 0. And it happens always like that. If I make this duration in make node shorter, then we get the next message, which is node off event much faster, like this. So you could see that we get now them nearly instantly at the same time. Cool. So that's what we need now. We just now send this actually list from pack object to MIDI format to prepare a MIDI message. And it's first inlet. Oh. And then connect MIDI format to MIDI out. And we could also still leave this connection originally, which we had here, just to pass also all incoming MIDI data through our MIDI effect to have maybe 2 layers of MIDI and trigger sounds with different things. So we could still leave it here, don't care about it. And we have this now sequencer, which should work. Let's see if it works. We can start it. And we hear that it triggers now our sound. Sound works a little strange. Why? Because we have this long duration of 500 milliseconds. Let's make it 100 milliseconds. So it's better. It's just the sound which sounds so strange when it has a long sustain. But our sequencer works very well. What we could do now in our sequencer to modify it is to actually add in control for the speed of our sequencer. I create a prototype of Time4Live dial and connect it to the cold inlet of Metro. Very good. We could also use the same kind of time control for the node duration here to change it in make node object. And that's already a very, very good sequencer. What we could modify here. First of all, we could change the length of our sequence. We create a live num box. We connect this live num box to the count maximum and to the size of our multi-slider. Just like this. And then we could have, for example, a size of 16 for our sequencer. Make it a little bit faster. And the cool thing, when we have velocity which is equal to 0, so for example one of those sliders would be completely down, then we don't get there a MIDI event. Cool. And the last thing which I want to add to our sequencer is a direction in which it works. So it can go forward, but we could also make it that it goes backwards or in pendulum mode, so back and forth. And we just need to change this in the second inlet of counter. So if we send here the value of 0, then it would go forward with counting. If we send here 1, then it goes backwards in counting. So for example, from 16 to 1. And then if we would send here the value of 2, then we basically make it work in this pendulum mode, back and forth. I make it 8, and now I send different values here, and we see these output values. So now it's forward mode from 1 to 8. I send 1, it's backwards mode from 8 to 1. And then I send 2, it's pendulum mode, back and forth. And for this thing, we could create a very cool controller with live tab. And its range we would specify with forward arrow, backwards arrow, and arrow which goes in two sides, like this. And now from this first outlet, we just get an item index. And this item index we just send actually in this second inlet of counter to change dynamically the direction of our sequence. Now we could adjust all these UI objects to presentation mode. Let's place all of this nicely. Also, let's say in inspector window that we open our patch in presentation mode in Ableton and place things all like this. And the note duration we could put right in the end. Name it to save, close it, and use for all the things which you want to use it for. Great. So only the last thing to add here is actually tempo sync with global tempo of Ableton, so that it starts when we play back here anything on our timeline, and it stops when we stop this playback. And to do this, actually we need to change one thing here in our patch, and this is a metro object. Instead of it, we would use a phaser object and use a special attribute which is called lock. It locks this phaser to the tempo of Ableton, and it works only when we have this playback mode, otherwise it doesn't work. And what phaser is just a sawtooth oscillator. For example, we could say that with frequency of 1 Hz we would get this phaser, but only when we have our Ableton in playback mode. We could connect a live scope to see that this is actually just a signal. And you see that we don't get any signal yet, but if I play back our Ableton, we would start getting our signal if we would specify the frequency in note values. And these note values could be anything: 4th note, 16 notes, 8 note. And now we could use this drop from maximum value in this waveform to the minimum to generate a bang. To do this, I just go to Help File, Tempo Relative tab, and copy this Detect Edge Abstraction. And if I connect to it our phaser, then from its output, from this Detect Edge output, I get a bang. And so that thing we could delete and then send the bang to the counter. See if it works. Yes, it works. And then with live menu object, we could take a prototype of note values, and from the second output of this live menu object, we could change the note value. So the speed of our sequence. Let's add it also to presentation mode now. And then save it. We can close it and just enjoy our sequencer. 4th notes, then 16 notes. Make it work only forward, make it work backward, change the length of a sequence, length of MIDI note, make it back 8 notes, then we could add just effect to our sound, maybe add some scale quantization for incoming MIDI values. Let's make it back 16 actually, it's more fun. And so it works really well. Congratulations, we did it together, and just add maybe some rhythm. And you've got the perfect sequencer to work with Ableton. And once you stop your playback, the sequencer is also not working anymore. You start playback again, it works again. So it's really great and stable for working in sync with tempo of Ableton. That was it for today, and we will see us in the next videos. Bye bye.